I can hear you as well. Our today's guest, well, is a person everyone knows. Mikhail Blinkin, director of Institute for Transport Economics and Transport in the Higher School of Economics. And our today's discussion will be about the future of mobility and transport development in the cities. And our session will include a presentation for 25 minutes, and then we will have the chance to answer questions and have an additional discussion. Thank you, Aleksey. Maybe you have a microphone for me just to go around. Well, we'll have more fun and I will be able to see slides myself. Let's begin with item 1, the history of our topic. Throughout the history, mobility format changed very few times. The first shift was on the threshold of the Middle Ages and the New Times, the middle of the 17th century. The famous and notorious invention by Blaise Pascal. Let's go back. Wow, is it possible to move both ways? Yeah. The famous invention of Blaise Pascal, the public transportation, and also that was the time where taxis, rent-a-cars, and car-sharing phenomenon appeared, but only horses were used at that time. The next shift was the beginning of the 20th century, the MaaS car by Ford and the concept of models. You want to drive cars, so I will have to redesign cities. Yes, so Moses was at the same position in New York as my friend Marat Hosnuling is taking now in Moscow. And the next transition is the mobility 4.0. And I can explain why Moscow will be the first to become part of this epoch. So, till the beginning of the 20th century in New York or St. Petersburg, there were not more than 10 individual cars for 1,000 citizens from the times of the king of Sennacheribus in Assyria, because it was luxury class, because an individual stall and a parking shed was required. So now we have cars from 400 to 500 cars per 1,000 residents in Russian cities, and maybe more cars than residents in the city of Albany in the United States. So from the times of the kings till the 20th century, we had very low individual cars per residence, and then you see like a rapid decline. But tomorrow we will have some cars based on robotics technologies. So you see that the mobile vehicle is more important than a parked one. It was first centuries in the 9th century before Christ in Assyria. But that's the idea. The master plan of Nineveh city before the auto cart was invented. So the mobile vehicle is more important than the parked one. So if you can read in English, please read this book, Edge City by Joel Garrow. So the parking lot parking has been the key determinant of human life since at least the 7th century BC. And it still remains that important. So in technical language, how many residents can stay in 1 hectare of resident areas, and how many centers. So yesterday, together with Sergei Skuratov, a famous architect, we were discussing how many people could live in the center of Moscow, like 2 million people with schools and greenery. But we will not get enough parking spaces there. Now, let's talk about how the urban space is distributed. So before MaaS car arrived, the layout of the city was that we had, so you see some space for mobility, for streets, and the space for car storage and parking. So the picture with 3 equal thirds is what we have in San Francisco. 1/3 for mobility, 1/3 for storage and parking, and 1/3 for residential areas. And in our case, the share of streets and motorways is just 10%. That's why we have congestions. So the key parameter is LAC, land allocated to streets. In olden Russian textbooks, it was called Abeliros rate. In older cities, it was 10% of LAC. In motorized cities, 1/3. In West Europe cities adapted after the World War II, 25%. And in Asian megacities and post-Soviet countries, it's 9%. And my student who did his master studies, he said that I'm exaggerating. Please compare Krasnoyarsk and Toronto. Krasnoyarsk. Have a look. Comparable areas. In Krasnoyarsk, it's less than 10%, and this is Toronto, 33%. It's impossible to invent it. Just check Google Maps. In older days, you had to find some specialist books. So the balance between the demand and the offer of whether you can use a car is defined by the density of populations and the level of car use. It's determined by the psychology of drivers, of the first generation of drivers. And as for the asphalt, we are based on the layout which originated in the first years of the Soviet power. So we have 3 parameters. The density of vehicles less, and population's density. So in Moscow, we will arrive at the number of 20. So this is 10 times less compared to every US-American city, like Boston, where I used to drive. That's history. That's not the case of Moscow being bad and Boston is good. And this is despite the transport mobility program implemented under Sobyanin years, which was colossal. As a famous astrophysicist, Shklovsky, said, yes, I can use bulldozer, but I cannot change the curve rate of the Earth. Although Moscow offered a superb road construction program, and excitingly, cities either waste time or waste space, because you need to clear space for people to be able to drive their vehicles. So, and you see a standard 17 minutes trip, you have either waste of time or waste of space. So the storage laws are universal. You need either to extend space or waste time. This is a quotation from Brodsky, as if Posidonus extended space while we were wasting time. So this is a graph from UN Habitat. At the moment, we're about to our Chancellor is about to sign an agreement with the United Habitat Director. The standard graph of square meters per one car. So in Australia and United States, it's 70 meters, and in Moscow it would be 20 to 22 meters. If you have just the area of 400 feet per one vehicle, both in America and Russia. So if I have twice as many square as many cars per square meters, then you cannot technically resolve the problem. So that's why Moscow will have to move to the next stage of mobility first. And you cannot also skip the models. So cities of Russia would have to be integrated into the mobile of the future Mobility 4. So this is a guest of Moscow. So UITP is very conservative, existing from 1880s. So he was, this is a very good guy. He came to see us in Moscow. And we always had this classification of collective versus individual, but it has 4 dimensions. Why? Due to the arrival of ride-sharing and car-sharing. So private access and public access, collective use or individual use. This is a totally different view. Yes, and I translated it into Russian for you to understand it. Well, yes, I'm talking fast, so please ask the organizers for my slides. And the framework would be of the new mobility would be based on the integrated rail systems of the digital system, including metropolitans and urban railways and tram lanes of the new generation. So development of the transportation system in Moscow is following this trend. So the Moscow Circle Ring is a project a passenger should get adapted to in half a year, but it happened in just 1 week's time, so we caught the trend. I also like this picture. So please compare the Moscow Circle Ring with RER. So even aesthetically, they're close. So RER was influenced by Soviet planners in the end of 1960s. It was implemented in Paris, and we were 40 years late. And I spoke to my friends. I hope that the Moscow Central Diameter will also contribute to the Moscow transit system in winter this year. In terms of philosophy, what's Mobility 4.0? The idea of right-of-way. The comfort of a pedestrian is a priority compared to comfort for car drivers. And the public transportation is not a specific social service, but a cornerstone in how you organize the life of the city. So, and in Europe, they arrived to this in the White Book in 1980s. So, public transportation is not something marginal. Idea number 2, mobility as a service is supported by the comprehensive system of urban services, not by private property. The fundamental idea is information everywhere. It should be based on mobile application, informators, planners using Uber and mobile applications. So the head of Deutsche Bahn, Dr. Gruber, my friend, said that today a girl or a guy with a smartphone have access to more information than control operating Deutsche Bahn 15 years ago. And the sharing economy. The sharing economy is on the thresholds and outside. So car sharing is important. And the main trends, the mobility of Pascal is more individualized, and the mobility of Ford is more cooperations. And we see that the role and priority of the southeast corner is increasing. So it's about micro mobility, including bicycle and the pedestrian move. So it's becoming more and more important. So, just 1 second, let me tell you. And fundamentally, the strictest thing from this mobility 4.0. So the idea of road pricing. So the end of freeloaders. There was an outstanding UK economist Alan Walters who consulted Margaret Thatcher. So he wrote that phrase, that introduction of the direct pricing, direct road pricing, leads to the growth of national income, despite the fact that, like, free goods, that the road is about free goods. And Robin Smith, who came to Moscow in 1981, so he was friend of Valery Bobkov, and I missed his lecture stupidly because I didn't know who he was. Who was Robin Smith? But after his presentations on road pricing, I quoted in the archive on Alex Douglas Hume. So he said, I must oath. Let us take a vow that if we are elected, we will never again set up a study like this one. Yeah, so it was a nightmare. But since then, this has become a common point, because after we invented electronic road pricing, everyone does this. Yeah, so, and we had the head of Singapore's transportation system, and he says, well, it goes without saying, all my engineers know about that. That's the nearest future. I will pay for my trip as I pay my electricity bill.
Now where we are is in the center, the Tsvetnoy Boulevard, or somewhere in the outskirts in Mityna, whether I used my car in the peak hours or in some more relaxed times. So there are a lot of electronic devices, gadgets, but for that we require only political solution. Technically, we are ready to be the best city in the world. Let's ask our friends from the technical department how many gadgets and devices we have on the roads on Moscow, much more than anywhere in Europe. Ask the colleagues, ask Biryukov, ask everyone else, so we can get there. The problem is mere in the mind, not technological one. So this is an example from Singapore. And this represents this private transport policy measures. So what do they have? This vehicle quota system and electronic road pricing. So every year, due to ecological reasons, the city doesn't use the cars for that reasons. And the other issue is a voucher. So you can buy just a limited amount of cars. So Singapore is a very expensive city, and they have 190 cars for 1,000 people. This is 4 times better than in Moscow due to this pricing. The ecology wins. Actually, there are a lot of benefits. This is the more probable scenario. Because money always is due to political will. The parking for payment in the center of Moscow was also the result of the political decision of Sobyanin. So here we need this joint will. Residential mobility is a new trend. You don't have to go far away. If you change your job, then you can just change your housing, and this gives the rise to hypothec, to renting, house renting, home renting, and the change on hypothec rules for mortgage rules. So in this country we don't have regulation for that, but this helps to release this transport burden in the city. Where will we always have cars? So in the Moscow area, when there are many small houses, technically for many years will not be able to do anything, but parking drive will be prevailing there. So, for instance, I took a train, and from the train I took a car, a taxi, and the luxury segment, as it was in the 19th century. So, all this shit we have together, when there are more cars in the street than people will stop for a while, like carriages, right? Well, luxury in the 19th century. And I would like to finish with the words by Phil Goodwin, a great colleague of mine, a person of my generation, unlike Robert Smith, and he said, "It may all seem very complicated just at the moment, but we do our children no favors if we confine them to a car-dependent mobility, and I think our grandchildren will wonder what took us so long." I've been trying to do in time. Thank you so much, Mikhail. Why does it happen today? So the boom of public transport development, electric cars, autonomous cars, what has driven it? Why recently this area has started to developing? Thank you for an interesting question. It's due to technological and psychological issues. When I first saw car sharing, that was in the competition one of the university, and I remember how we assessed it. Like, you remember the Soviet times, students sometimes shared one jacket for 2 of them. So I told myself, how can I do it? I don't like it. I couldn't leave it. As soon as we got mobile apps, this became a very popular service. SPV is the format, sharing autonomous driving of electric vehicles. It is what is happening today and what is really very popular. And the prognosis is that 1/3 of car sales will be in this format. So this is a car sharing with some addition. I found this car and I've pressed the button and it is here waiting for me. This is not something novel, robotic, but a very simple service which will make this car sharing even more convenient. I've seen it in Munich, in an innovative center of BMW. BMW, and they told us that will start tomorrow. We can't do it technically. We need only the legal framework. The legal framework is easy in Moscow, so we'll have things quicker. Speaking about psychology, cars came to Russia quite late, and for many years we had first generation cars, and that first generation was so happy to own a car. And I remember that for Soviet people it was a luxury, and for Americans, well, the cars were just a utility instrument. But now I have a new generation saying, why should I own a car? I use car sharing, I use taxis, public transport. I have two employees who come to their work by bicycle. So things change, and the minds change of different generations. There was a classical picture showing how many people can get into one car, into one bus, and on one bicycle. And there is another picture comparing autonomous transport, transport, and different kinds of taxis. These are the inventions and the new techniques, but still they face the problem of space for the cars. Don't you think we are too much in for technologies, and people from startups often forget about mobility in the city, that even a robotic car occupies the same space as an ordinary car, traditional one? Thank you for a very interesting question. One of the most debatable topics it is now, and in accordance with the prognosis by my colleagues from Europe, United States of America, and Japan, and the answer is as follows. Is this combination of sharing plus technologies will win people's minds? I will have one shared car instead of 3 or 4 cars I'm using today. The prognosis represents different figures, but anyway, there will be less cars, less metal in the cities, so that and things will be more comfortable. There will be individual cars, but instead of the car I own and which I have for 24 hours in the garage or on the street, we have a different opportunity. When I do not use my car, somebody else will use it. It's like the carriages in supermarkets. We don't buy carriages for ourselves. So geometrically, that will be a relief. The winning of the idea of MaaS, mobility as a service, is really beneficial for me. Some parts of my territory I will take and go by train, and then I'll go by car. So this is kind of a constructor. My work and my way will be composed of some elements. This is where the mobility goes. How realistic it is? Well, I think it is quite realistic. 30 years ago, in 1998, the amount of mobile phones was really small because all of them were owned by the government and the Ministry of Defense. I think that totally there were about 20 mobile phones. The Minister of Defense, he had a mobile phone and he had connection with the whole world, but not people. Today, Russia is in top 10 countries for mobile phone users. By the way, the transportation, the road system, we are in top 10 to 20 due to different service. So digital approach is really rapidly developing here and much easier than road systems. What about the public transport? All these new types of transport are developing. What should they do? Well, the key element of Mobility 4.0 is high productive rail systems, no Uber taxis, no SAEF will help people to get where they want in a city millennia until we invent the system of teleportation. In the ATP Congress I've just been, we can see that more and more wagons and carriages are introduced for trains, for different trams, and trams. This is the trend of today. These are the modern, high productive systems. That is why I welcome all these systems of Moscow Central Ring and MCD. We are in trend, actually. Well, Uber system is good, but public transport is easier. Fulfilled on the rails, it's more comfortable for people and it is more eco-friendly. Thank you so much. Maybe people have questions for you. If not, then I would like once again to thank you for participating in our conference.